19 years ago, the street right behind us, for those that remember, was tense, was full of energy for the right reasons. There was a dramatic buildup about to happen within hours. This book on the table here, it's called 28 Days That Changed Lebanon. I don't know if it's still at Antoine. Antoine Library has it. You can order it. It's a foreword by Yesma Fleihan. Yesma Fleihan is the widow of Basil Fleihan. He was a former minister of economy that survived a truck bombing on February 14, 2005. And he was sitting next to Rafiq Hariri, who died instantly. Basil Fleihan survived. He succumbed to his wounds 7 weeks later, and his wife, in the meantime, was writing a foreword to this book about what would happen one day from today, 19 years ago, which was the March 14 demonstration. I was here. Just a show of hands, just to see who was here in those weeks leading up to March 14. Who was here in Beirut at the time? One person, 2, 3. Anyone in the back was here? No.
Your mom.
Well, yeah. Okay, that's 4 people only.
Yeah.
Which is why exactly.
Which is what my first question was about.
Right. No, let me give it to you in a second. That's important because I think the generation shifted. March 14 is history. And if you don't talk about what happened 19 years ago, it will fade faster. Which is why I insisted on at least reflecting a bit about it tonight. Which is why I wanted to delve into March 14.
Yeah.
And what it meant to both of us. And I know, Wael, you were much younger. Well, you are much younger than me. But I know from what you've told me before, your political awakening begins that day.
Yeah. Not 14th of March, but in that period, of course.
Yeah, in that stretch of time. Mine did as well. So, I'm not doing the interviewing tonight. Wael will be interviewing me. Towards the end, I'll ask him questions. And we'll meet up at October 17, towards the end.
Sure.
But let's go back now to March 14, 2005. You have the mic.
Yeah. Thanks for everyone for being here, first of all. Especially that the crowd is not familiar with March 14. I think we should define it. So that's my first question. So not what March 14 is to you. What happened during that period that made it so interesting? And the historical moment, I think, in Lebanon's history. Important moment in Lebanon's history. So please.
The personal angle?
Not the personal angle. In general, what is March 14? Then we can talk about what it meant to you, what it meant to me.
Okay. So this is how I define it. It's not a date.
Yeah.
Even though that's literally the definition, it's a date and time. For me, it's not that. It's the build-up to change. But change that we take for granted today. February 13, 2005.
14.
No. February 13, you wouldn't be able to talk the way we're talking.
Yeah.
A month earlier, you would be afraid of censorship or being called out or getting in trouble. And that's not because we're paranoid. That was the norm.
Trouble as in you might get killed as well, right?
Syrian occupation lasted for many years and people adjusted. But they adjusted, I think, mostly to expression. Politics was severed. February 13, if you were talking about the Syrian regime, you were either someone bold, like Samir Asir, who started doing that, or you were someone in power doing it behind the scenes, or you were attending a Bristol meeting months earlier, trying to pave a foundation for what could be criticism towards the regime. But February 13, 2005, the occupation was still entrenched.
Samir Asir is one of the journalists who were assassinated after 2005, after the assassination of Rafiq Hariri. There were political assassinations, and Samir Asir was one of them. He was a journalist. He worked for Al-Nahar. Not a lot of people know that he used to work at the newspaper I work at now, which is L'Orient Le Jour. Samir Asir started talking against the... So the Syrian regime occupied Lebanon. It existed its military was in Lebanon up until 2005. Samir Asir, I was a kid then. I'm genuinely asking you. Samir Asir started making statements against the Syrian regime right before February 14 or years before?
He would do it and then get in trouble. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
It's funny. I found a quote. I thought it was for Jean Assir when he was interrogated a few months ago or almost a year ago. If you just substitute certain names, you would imagine it's just the same story again. Samir Assir is in trouble for an article he writes. He's taken away. And then Rafiq Hariri releases him. Yeah, I can't remember the year. It's 2002 maybe or 2003.
What was the article?
You know, the title and exactly what it was about at that moment escapes me right now.
Yeah.
I can find it.
It's a long time ago.
It's a long time ago, yeah. And I have to get this right. It's Jamil Sayed who was involved always in pressuring Samir Assir and other journalists too, sometimes at the Daily Star.
Yeah.
The Daily Star would actually get phone calls to reconsider certain writing in English.
Even foreign journalists at the time?
And exactly. So the English edition at the Daily Star, like in a way today, Lorient today, it doesn't really impact the masses. So there's always a bit of leeway. Okay. But I think back then, Daily Star was the only serious English outlet. You had writers like Michael Young there, and you also had certain articles that were deemed problematic. Samir Assir was arrested several times, and that's before 2005. So my point was, defining it is, there's a moment in time where the foundation of occupation cracks. And then Lebanese, very quickly, and in my opinion, reflecting reality at the time, said enough is enough about the Syrian occupation.
But how was it like, the Syrian occupation in Lebanon? Was it the same as the censorship that happens in Syria, or like a little bit looser, for example? In your opinion, because you were older than me back then. Because there's a reason people revolted, right? The censorship part, the whatever, assassinations part, the controlling Lebanese politics to a large extent. So in terms of journalistic censorship or anyone expressing their opinion, was it the same as Syria, or did they give a margin of independence in Lebanon?
I'm not an expert on Syrian activism at that stretch of time.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it being worse here than Syria.
Yeah.
I would assume somebody like Samir Assir cannot exist in Syria back then.
Yeah.
So there is definitely a maneuvering space here that is different.
Okay.
But that said, I don't think of March 14 as that demonstration alone. You're asking me to define it.
Yeah.
And in my mind, it's the buildup. And it takes a fundamental different turn on February 14, 2005, which is when Rafiq Hariri is killed. Going back to the beginning, though, the reason I mentioned Jemmaisi is because I don't know if this is forgotten largely, but all the tit-for-tat demonstrations that were happening on a daily basis, weekly basis. March 8 is 6 days earlier. March 14 is not the only anti-Syrian protest. There were pro and anti-protests happening regularly.
Yeah.
And people coming in and out of Jemmaisi. And I don't know if the 4 people that were here back then remember it the same way. It was optimistic, even when there was a threat, a real threat. But there was serious optimism that things were changing. Now, of course, March 14 is a 1-month anniversary following Rafiq Hariri's death. It's a week following the March 8 demonstration.
Which shook the country, the Rafiq Hariri assassination. There was an assassination attempt before Rafiq Hariri, which is Marwan Ahmadi, if you remember. And then the Rafiq Hariri assassination took place, and it shook the country. And the momentum which started prior to February 14, when Rafiq Hariri was killed, it became stronger, leading to March 14 before. So,
and I don't know if anyone would remember this. It's a different era. Michel Aoun is popular.
Yeah,
he's really popular. He became, perhaps unfairly, the opposition figure.
No?
Not at that time. 2004, people are whispering about Michel Aoun's return. There's no Tayyar Watan al-Hur. There's no FPM. There's a banned Lebanese Forces Party with its leader.
FPM, you mean?
Yeah, there's no FPM.
Free Patriotic Movement, yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
Big difference, yeah.
Right. What did you think I was talking about?
No, carry on.
There's only one, I think, FPM.
Yeah.
There's no Lebanese forces. It's illegal. It's banned. Samir Jaja is in jail for a decade at that time, almost 11 years.
Michel Aoun in exile.
Amin Jmayel, who's a lightweight in politics, a lightweight, had just returned.
Yeah.
But Michel Aoun, perhaps unfairly, is given that mantle of opposition to Syrian hegemony, and he's being interviewed again on Lebanese stations. Somebody can correct me. I don't know if it's an interview with him that gets MTV blocked. I have to remember exactly what. Was it that's right?
Before 2005.
Sorry, there's 5 people in the room now that were here on March 14th. Thank you. So MTV, which is banned for almost a decade, for 8 years, is in trouble because it's interviewing Michel Aoun.
Yeah.
So that's the climate. Also, there is no serious opposition to Syrian hegemony here in day-to-day politics. Everyone is working with the Syrian regime in different ways. But things are changing slowly. The Bristol meeting is one of those signs where there's an intelligentsia, and Bassel Fleihan, who I mentioned earlier, is sent to represent Rafiq Hariri. There's a shift. There's a shift that something is changing on the ground. But again, February 13, 2005, it's impossible to imagine the Syrian occupation ending, let alone a month later, at that time, the largest protest in Lebanese history. So that's still away.
Just one more detail. Before the assassination of Rafiq Hariri, there was the UN decision 1559, which said that the Syrian army should withdraw from Lebanon and all the militias in Lebanon should dismantle. And Rafiq Hariri, they say, had a hand in that decision. So that's before his assassination. Then the assassination happens. And then there's 2 camps in Lebanon. Now we call them 8th of March and 14th of March because of those dates. So the 8th of March, people were pro-Syrian regime. They were protesting as well were they calling for the remain of the Syrian regime in Lebanon?
I mean, my memory of March 8 is not as important, perhaps, for many reasons. The first, it's an organized rally.
Yeah.
It's a thank you Syria rally. Shukran Bashar, Shukran Surya, all that stuff. And it's small. And in the sense that it's not the major parties that are all joining hands. It's marginal, with the exception of Hezbollah.
And Amal.
Marginal. And compared to Hezbollah and Al-Marada are there, I think SSNP takes part in that protest.
Yeah, a small group, but sure.
Yeah. So that's what I meant. In other words, it's a Hezbollah organized rally, but it's not a coalition.
Okay.
And March 8 is really not the story because tit-for-tat demonstrations are happening anyway.
Yeah, I'm saying the reason why I'm mentioning March 8 is because to a large extent, the March 14, which is one of the biggest protests in Lebanese history, came as a reaction to the March 8 protest. So there's this thank you Syria protest that were happening. Yeah. March 8 was the biggest. And then there was the month anniversary of Rafiq Hariri, which became big, but some of it was a reaction to March 8.
I think a lot of it was reactions towards each other too. Yeah. March 8 would not have happened had there not been anti-Syrian protests happening.
Sure.
And also it's small compared to October 17. We'll leave that to the end. But
March 14 protest.
In terms of numbers and in terms of geography, March 14 does not compare to October 17. No, and leaning on facts, numbers on the ground, nobody really knows how many people showed up on March 14.
And on both days,
No, there's an estimate. These are guesses. It's roughly 600,000 on March 8 and just over 1 million on March 14.
Yeah.
October 17, if you take everyone protesting at the same time, that number is probably much larger.
Okay.
But I'm not trying to compare numbers. It's about what March 14 was in 2005.
Sure.
And we can leave October 17 to the end. Yeah. But yeah, it is a very it is a reaction to a government that has yet resigned. Omar Karami. Does anyone in this room remember Omar Karami?
Allah yarham.
Allah yarham. Yeah. Omar Karami is prime minister. It's a different era.
Yeah.
Omar Karami is the best representation of the Syrian regime in Lebanon. It's much more of a marriage of convenience than Frangieh and Bashar today. Omar Karami is Bashar's man. And that regime in Lebanon is being protested against. Things are changing fast. And guess who inherits the throne quickly? Before summer's elections, it's Najib Mikati.
Yeah.
Who's still prime minister today. I've often referred to him in media outlets as a spare wheel. But you can't keep driving a car on spare wheels. They go flat. Najib Mikati has been on and off for 2 decades a prime minister of convenience and collateral too. But those protests are doing 2 things at once. They're calling on the Syrian army to exit. Calling on also the mukhabarat, which people forget. It's less the army in Beirut, it's mukhabarat. 2002, the Syrian army had already left the coast. You didn't have Syrian checkpoints on the coast going north and south. They were in the middle of the country. They were not on the coast. You had access on the coast without seeing Syria's army. Mukhabarat everywhere. They leave.
Is there a reason that they were removed from their position?
I can't remember what.
I'm asking you because I was very young back then.
Why in 2002, not earlier? I have to. I mean,
not later. I mean,
I have to go back to why the Syrian army reorganized in Lebanon. But my guess is a lot of anti-Syrian sentiment that they read the room right too.
Okay.
And a Lebanese security situation that is already conducive enough to what Syria wants. There's no real resistance to Syria and Lebanon then. So it's anti-Syrian army, anti-Syrian mukhabarat, and also pointing the finger at Omar Karami, saying you have to go. You mentioned Marwan Ahmadi earlier. So I don't know if people forget now. This guy would show up with a Lebanese scarf and enter parliament as representing opposition. There's no opposition yet, but they're beginning to use that word too. And then, of course, March 14 happens, and things change very quickly.
Yeah. Resignation of the government after, and at some point, the Syrian regime, the Syrian army withdraws from Lebanon.
April 15, 2005, they officially exit the country. So it's a month after March 14.
Yeah. To you personally, what were you doing? Were you on the?
What was I doing?
I assume what did that mean to you before the March 14? Were you participating before February 14? Actually, were you participating in the anti-Syria protests? And what were you doing? Yeah, what did it mean to you? The March 14 movement then.
Well, there's no March 14 movement then. Earlier, so it doesn't mean anything yet. Syria to me is entrenched. I don't think of Syrian occupation as shakeable. And I also think at that time, and it's his name is so, Michel Aoun's name is everywhere. And he's always thought of as coming back. So I think that's where a lot of ideas were coming from, and that this opposition figure abroad is going to make a return. That to me is the only real sort of, that's the politics you're talking quietly that I remember vividly. I don't have any direct participation in the anti-Syrian student stuff that happened in the 90s. I'm maybe a bit too young. And also, I remember sections of my life where there's quiet diplomacy happening to try to circumvent the Syrian regime, but that's happening behind the scenes. That's not happening visibly on the news, and that's not happening on the street.
But you would know about it from your father, no?
Well, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah. So I'll give you one personal example. The Syrian foreign minister who died a few years ago, Walid Maalem, is a Syrian ambassador in Washington, D.C. in the late 90s. There is pushback against what the Syrians want in Lebanon there. So there is that kind of behind the scenes diplomacy taking shape. 1559 happens a few years later, but there's foundation for that too. Also, it's trying to get Syrian mukhabarat out of the Lebanese embassy. That stuff, that is real, that's documented stuff. But that's what I saw as somebody living in that experience much younger. Lebanese activism here, I was not a part of it. I've had guests that were arrested. I've spoken to guests that really tried hard in the 90s and failed. But I'm too young.
What about the protest itself, that same period? Between February 14, 2005 and March 14? Were you at the protest? For example, I had family members. My sister actually was there. I was not. What were you doing then? Were you at the protest?
I mean, coming from Hamra to downtown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how March 14 happens over time. It's Ras Beirut and Ashrafi meeting up in Martyrs Square.
Yeah.
It's not a national protest. It's not happening in Tripoli. It's not happening Nabati, Saida, anywhere else. It's happening here.
Let me ask you a question. So,
I'm sorry, can I say one more thing?
Please.
It's tents everywhere in Martyrs Square. People you know sleeping in Martyrs Square. It's people you know that are becoming overnight leaders as well. Visible there.
Sami Jmail now.
No, this is before Sami Jmail. I mean, not him. No, Samir Asir actually is one person.
Yeah.
That kind of uncomfortable politician.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. So March 14 called for the withdrawal of the Syrian regime from Lebanon,
yeah,
and the resignation of the government. Both things happened. So what's the value? What is March 14 after these two things happened? What did it call for?
We need to fill up an hour. I mean,
yeah.
Narrow that down a bit. What do you mean?
No, I mean March 14 was calling for Lebanese sovereignty, no? So it was calling for the withdrawal of the Syrian regime. It happened. And the resignation of the government, which happened, but it remained a movement. So what did this movement stand for after that?
Oh, meaning how it shifts into politics.
Yeah.
Okay, we can break that down though, because there's almost a 15-year story there.
Yeah.
But let's focus in on the first few years alone, because then the story becomes redundant.
Yeah. Then it's not March 14. Like even themselves, they would not call it March 14.
I think
anymore.
Yeah, by 2015, doesn't make sense to refer to that anymore as March 14. But in 2008, there is something still there.
Yeah.
I'll try to narrow it down to 3 years, if that's okay for you.
It is.
And you can also see exactly how a movement dies within 3 years. Maybe October 17 has a familiar legacy too, in hindsight. March 14, the strangest Lebanese leaders from the civil war are joining hands. These odd characters, like Walid Jumblat, Samir Jaja gets out of jail. Michel Aoun returns, I think, in April 2005. What did people call him? A tsunami when he returned? I mean, tsunamis you can manage. Well, look what happened to the country. Much more than a tsunami. You have people that should not be in politics entering politics. Saad Hariri. And then you have the usual suspects that find themselves trying to navigate. Nabih Berri, and everyone we talk about that's still around in politics. But there's a window, I think. From March 14 until June 2005, I think there's a reflection of reality. And I'll say this, it's all in hindsight. I don't know if politics has a chance in this country unless it reflects reality. And these are Lebanese parties that were popular enough back then. And these are parties that are no longer banned. These are leaders that are returning. There's a tabloid magazine I remember reading. It's Aoun Reja, Jaja Felil. No, what is it? Yeah, Aoun Reja, Jaja Felil, Anaterik. Or something like that. I don't remember the exact. In other words, these are not people that across the board are popular by everybody, but it's a reflection of reality. So you have enough Lebanese from enough solid parties with enough history coalescing for the first time since the end of the Civil War. That's unique. It's also the first occasion that Lebanese are dealing with their affairs without Syrian oversight. That's important too. And I think those 3 months actually reflected reality enough. What happens in June 2005 is now a subject of debate, and people debate that issue through and through. And
you mean التحالف الرباعي, the alliance
the
with
quadripartite.
Just let me explain that. So in June, before the election at the time, Jumblat and Hariri, Saad al-Hariri at the time, who were calling for the withdrawal of the Syrian regime, allied with their allies Hezbollah and Amal during the parliamentary election. So that was a turning point in that movement. Your feeling about that?
There's euphoria on March 14, 2005, and there's shock in June 2005. So within 3 months, 4 months, I think people are already disappointed. And
who's people? Because the leaders, they had the supporters.
Going back to how I remember things happening.
So you were shocked and disappointed.
It's because these names are they're not as toxic as they are now.
Yeah.
How can Michel Aoun not be part of this is one thing that's critical.
Yeah.
He becomes a independent candidate for a few months before he switches over to March 8. Even though the man he's March 14, his base was there on that day. So there's no denying that. That is one signal that there's something wrong. The other signal is status quo, national unity, is still the norm post-Syria. In other words, Hezbollah and the opposition from March 8 are treated as equals to majority rule. That's already a blunder, I think. And over time, people have pointed at that and saying, you're better off as an opposition in exile than a collaborator from within. And I think there are serious mistakes made from day one. And I think now, looking back, there's a real sentiment then that everyone has to be on the same page post-Syria withdrawal. If not, there's going to be something terrible on the horizon. And that fear shapes, I think, Saad Hariri's legacy from day one, in that he cannot do much about that problem. Better to work with it than against it. That's the kind of legacy, I think, that sends him from being a politician overnight to being someone in exile.
Was it coming from personal fear of getting assassinated like his father? Were the people making that alliance trying to protect themselves from being assassinated?
From March to June, there's...
The alliance, I mean.
Yeah. From March to June, you have George Hawi is killed and Samir Asir is killed.
Yeah.
Bassel Fleihan dies from his wounds. Rafiq Hariri is dead. That's 4. 4 Lebanese figures are dead from February to June 2005. I don't know what Saad Hariri is thinking about himself, but it is clear that assassinations are becoming leverage against this movement very quickly. And let me add that it's important. It's really important. George Hawi is a communist. I don't know if you can really be a communist anyway today, but he represents a party with communist...
He was an ex-head of the party, yeah.
Samir Asir is not a right-wing nationalist. He's an Arabist to a degree, and he's much more popular in Syria than he is in places here.
He's half Syrian, no?
He's half Palestinian, half Syrian. But he is also... These movements don't happen without those types of figures in the room. That's left-wing history in Lebanon that's being eliminated very early on. The old opposition to Hezbollah is being eliminated too, much earlier. But that's the leadership that emerges. It's decimated. I think that's also critical. And that if you're going to govern and you're going to survive in the country, you're probably going to make bad decisions like what happens in June.
For me, the value of March 14, in Arabic, the slogan was مشروع العبور إلى الدولة. It's the path towards a state. And I think they meant a sovereign state.
The slogan was Independence 2005. That was the slogan by everyone that was on the street then. Sovereignty is a word people have developed here to mean many things.
Yeah, but forget the word for sovereignty.
Yeah.
Their slogan was the pathway towards a state.
Yep.
Which I believe to this day is what Lebanon needs. We don't have a functional state. So I want to discuss with you if March 14, they actually made the right...
It's nice to have a full room. I didn't notice. It's full tonight.
Yeah.
Everyone's March 8, ready to kill us at the end. No, I'm joking.
Did they make the right choices towards that path to a proper state? In your opinion?
The
leaders of the March 14 back then.
I don't think any...
So the sovereignty, the sovereignty was there because the Syrian army withdrew from Lebanon. There needed to be some pathway towards a functioning state. Did they make the right choices towards that path? In your opinion?
I think every decision taken by that group of people is compromised.
Okay.
Every decision taken. And decisions made that were uncompromised, we know the people that are dead. We know all their names too. And that's why I brought this book. It's because there's a lot of people that try, within that camp, they're all March 14, all of them, try to make decisions that are not compromising to a new problem that's emerging, which is, as the Syrians leave, and you're right, the Syrian army exits the country, there's a group that is going to play a serious role in politics and security too. That happens very early on. That begins pre-March 14. The signals are made early on. And then you have a situation where you either confront that story or you either confront it and get eliminated or you compromise. And I think everyone that is still around from that era that played a role, all of them made compromising decisions.
But you think the compromise was purely based on fear of their own security, or they were corrupt politicians compromising because they can benefit from that compromise?
I tried jotting down today, actually yesterday, everything I remember it takes me time to go back and remember correctly.
Yeah.
There's months where Lebanese MPs and ministers are living in hotels out of fear.
Yeah.
I mean, that's 19 years ago, 18 years ago. There is a serious threat to institutions like parliament or ministers, or for that matter, anyone, whether it's intelligence or it could be every aspect of Lebanese governance that is provoking this issue is hiding out of fear. Now, the bigger names, maybe some of them back then are more comfortable with making compromising decisions for survival. Case in point is Walid Jumblat, who shifts his mind 100 times until where he is right now, which is all of the above. You have that kind of story. That's true. You also have somebody like Michel Aoun, who does the unthinkable. I mean, it's unthinkable to his own base too. Within months, by March of 2006, is that right? March 2000?
I'm not sure.
I think it's either February or March.
Well, regardless, yeah.
Okay, so
he allied with Hezbollah.
A year after March 14 and 9 or 8 months after elections, he goes from being an independent figure to fully on board with the other team. That's a huge compromising decision. That's the most visible one that fractures the coalition early on. That, I think, is real compromise. And even if Gibran Basir today pretends like he's a critic of Hezbollah, no one buys it. You can't deliver that message 20 years later and get away with it.
Look, to be fair, to this point, the security issue, once with Jad Ghosn, he was asking you for advice because he wants to have an intellectual from the 14th of March on his show. And you said that they are mostly all assassinated. The ones who are not corrupt and very smart, like to have on the podcast. And I would agree with that statement. But the point I was trying to make is March 14 as a movement, like if we're trying to reflect back, what did it lack in terms of going in the right direction to build a state. Because this is what Lebanon needs right now. Other than there were compromises made because of security reasons, but there were also corrupt politicians. I'll give you an example.
You can give many examples.
Yeah, but like obvious examples. Sharing judiciary seats, for example, with Hezbollah. Like you take a number of seats in there as judges, and we share these seats. Future Movement was involved as well. This is not a project to build a state. Like you can't take the excuse of fearing for your own security as an excuse to doing such acts. Would you agree on that?
That to me is the beginning of the end. That's when you're making decisions to protect your political opponent. I agree with you fundamentally.
But that's from the beginning, no?
That is very early on.
Yeah.
And I think it's early on for many reasons, one of which is all the signs are indicating that Hezbollah is not going to be a disarmed militia entering politics. All indicators are this group is changing quickly. I'll give you another example. Everything we talk about today goes back to that era. Everything. July 2006, we're at war. Israel and Hezbollah are at war. The thing that we talk about all the time today is born from that war, 1701. 1701 is a byproduct of Hezbollah accepting terms to end that war. That is compromise with Hezbollah by default. You have to engage that party if you're going to have solutions in Lebanon.
Yeah.
I think the reading back then, was that this group can change. This group can evolve into something else. I think a lot of people, not Lebanese only, a lot of people didn't really appreciate what Hezbollah was turning into. This is all hindsight. 1701 is acceptable to Hezbollah.
Yeah.
That's unthinkable right now.
I guess the point that I'm trying to make is even back then, the problem was not just Hezbollah. It was Hezbollah, and on the other side, you didn't have fully, some of them, of course, were clean politicians breaking towards a proper state. That's the, so it's two things. It's Hezbollah, yeah, we have a problem of, until today, of the sovereignty of the state, but we have another problem, which is politicians are corrupt.
I think you asked it earlier. These are not solutions. March 14 is not a solution to Lebanon. And by the way, 1701 is not a solution either. And 1559 will not solve our problems. These are stepping stones. I think March 14 in its conclusion is a different country. It looks different with different leaders. That's, I think, the evolution of that movement had it played its course. Instead, you have stepping stones. And these stepping stones tend to get disrupted early on, quickly. 2006, which you probably would remember more as you're getting older too. You can't go into downtown.
Yeah.
For a year and a half, up to 2 years. A permanent protest delegitimizing a government. For nearly 2 years. That's paralysis. I don't know what you can do in those 2 years except Hezbollah's terms and stay in power.
They didn't even do that.
Well,
they did that after 2008.
After a string of assassinations from 2006 to 2008, they become monthly. This is not spread out over history. These are month-to-month killings. In May 2008, what is left, I think, and that's the 3-year journey, what is left of March 14 makes its final stand. And a war breaks out on the streets of Beirut. I think that is how a movement gets disrupted to the point that it becomes meaningless.
Then what you're trying to say is in May, is it May 8th? May 8th, yeah. The government makes 2 decisions and Hezbollah objects to that by starting a military, what would you call it? Occupation? Not that, I wouldn't call it, yeah.
Occupation.
Military reaction to those decisions, forcing the government to withdraw its decision.
The guy speaking tonight at 8 o'clock about the future of Lebanon is the guy speaking to us on May 7, 2008 about the future of Lebanon. The ball's in his court. The opposition to him did, at that point, try to fire one person at the airport, too close to that group, and they didn't even begin. Disrupting telecoms used by that group, monitoring March 14 people. You can't even go there. When you go there, you start a war. So it ends quickly. I agree with you, though. I agree that the better decision, if one is to keep their dignity in check, is to be a noble opposition in exile, or not assume politics to begin with, and force Hezbollah's hands from day one.
I'm not only saying that. I'm saying instead of being involved in corrupt judiciary distribution of seats, corrupt electricity sector, like you cannot take Hezbollah as an excuse to those things. And people from the 14th of March were involved in these things. For example, the budget we had for decades, Roni, we didn't have, what do you call it? Ata hisabat, like the budgets get made and the government checks if they abided by the budget. That was never made under the 14th of March. That, like this a proper functioning state, this is the ABCs of functioning state. They did not even attempt that. So how do you, like, if Hezbollah is the problem, to try to like have a better alternative is through acting nobly, yes, but acting in a non-corrupt way, like doing what the functional state does, which is if the judges has to have an independency, for example. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying just in terms of compromising with Hezbollah. I'm saying doing the right things despite Hezbollah.
Yeah.
And that was not present. So I'm saying it's not just a Hezbollah problem back then.
Lebanon is not a Hezbollah problem.
Okay, that's what okay.
No, Lebanon, I was born before this group existed. I mean, no, it's not the same thing.
This is on the record. It's recorded, huh?
No. That's not like no. I mean, Lebanon's been fucked up from long. It's a screwed up country anyway, with or without this group, yes. But you can manage that country better. And you can do things that are unthinkable if that kind of problem doesn't exist. Yeah. But you're right. There's so many problems in this country that are indirectly tied to bigger things. But there's no direct link between throwing your trash in the sea and a geopolitical war in the south. I agree. The deterioration of the state, though, long term, is a huge problem for everybody. And it leads to violence, low-level anarchy. And I think that's where we are right now. I don't blame every action on that group. Obviously, no. That's not true. But if you want to pursue authority in this country without taking that group's concerns into account, you simply can't.
So I think
and that group's concerns do not match, I think, with what most Lebanese want in their lives today. A governable state. I don't think Lebanese aspirations match that group's calculations.
So, and they are by far the strongest party in Lebanon. I'm not denying that part. But exactly what you said, Lebanon is not a Hezbollah problem. I would agree to that. So I think it's time to move to the October 17 movement. This is unless yeah.
Before we get to October 17, actually, let's push one more thing.
Yeah.
Your memory of your sort of your own aspirations that lead you to October 17. But you mentioned it already. March 14 did mean something to you then. Let me ask you, what does it mean to you as somebody who grows up with that movement in the background? And it's also fading fast. So what does it mean to you?
As I said on your podcast previously, as you said, March 14 was not March 14, that whole period, the assassination of Rafi al-Hariri, March 14, the political assassinations that were happening at the time, Sabah Ayyar, May 7 incidents. This was the period of my political awakening. So from then until now, like I've been following, this is why I'm a journalist. I've been following politics non-stop. Back then you would have the same, honestly, if I'm being honest, you would have the same opinions as I was 11, barely 12, as your parents. So my parents, Lebanese Communist Party members, who were not aligned with the Lebanese Communist Party at the time because it was a pro-Syria Lebanese Communist Party. Back then, their head was Syria affiliated. So as what we talked about, the censorship that the Syrian army has done at Lebanon, the assassinations, they are they would not support such things. So when the Rafi al-Hariri assassination happened, they also viewed it as an opportunity for the liberation of that whatever we want to call it, like the presence of the Syrian army in Lebanon. So that was my opinion back then. May 7.
You said ex-communists more in the George Hawi camp or not?
Yeah.
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 Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. So, May 8 happens, of course. The government takes 2 decisions. Something very important. So they were anti-Syrian regime, but they had some respect for Hezbollah. Because back then, a lot of people were sympathizers for Hezbollah as a resistance. Fast forward, October 17 changed a lot of my perspective regarding Lebanese politics. Not just because of October 17, because I became a journalist as well. And I started to see the political game from the inside. So my reflection of March 14 is that I think we can talk about October 17. October 17 happens. There were movements even before, like the 2015
By the way, I like you as the host with the leg crossed and the authority, you know? You project confidence when you're in charge.
I'm trying.
Yeah. I'm a bit intimidated by you. Okay.
Yeah, sometimes at the podcast, because I'm co-hosting the Beirut Banyan now, because I sit like this, sometimes the camera misses me, because I should be leaning forward towards the mic.
I have shots of Wael literally lying down. And I'm always, come back.
Yes.
Can I lie down? No?
No. Please, feel free. Yeah. So October 17 happens. It's, I think, because we are supposed to talk about movements, why they fail, and what is their value. October 17, I think the value of October 17 is we have many problems related to foreign actors. But we also have problems related to internal politics. And this, to me, what October 17 is. I don't know if you would agree, Ron.
All right, I'll try to navigate this and make it maybe more relevant to where we are right now, because it's quite interesting also. October 17 is history too.
Yeah.
Even though we're both in its shadow, its shadow is more immediate, but it is also faded. So I'll try to connect the two to where we are. You mentioned ex-communists in March 14. We both talked about a writer who's left-leaning, right? And others too that belong to that camp that are comfortable reaching common goals with right-wing, or whatever you want to call them, Lebanese nationalists. So that is important. It reflects reality. It's not academic. It's not ivory tower. It's real. George Hawi and Samir Jaja have nothing in common. Nothing in common, but they can see a common goal that will impact them both. That, to me, is a healthier exercise in Lebanese politics. Puritanism, I think, is what comes out of October 17. It's not there in March 14. Now, Puritanism, I don't think, maybe in an intellectual exercise, maybe it works in that you have a small echo chamber. Everyone agrees to everything you're saying. 100% agreement leaves you with Halimi Kakour. She's October 17. I can't imagine her fitting into March 14. Not about her personally, but her as in so rigid. That person can evolve from October 17. They can. I don't think they can exist in March 14. Populism, I don't think was there in March 14. Populism as in the economic crisis that we all live through, that we suffer through, creates, I think, bad actors. These bad actors, I think, thrive because of moments like this. Maybe they have good...
You mean October 17? Whom are we talking about?
People that want to inherit power with Hezbollah early on. They are born out of pain. Their rise is through October 17. So October 17 includes them. It includes populism. It includes a more Mumena-like left. It does not include, I think, everyone, but it's bigger. It's a shared pain that is larger. It's economics focused. And I agree with you completely. Geopolitics is on no one's tongue on October 17, 2019. I completely agree.
We would agree that the banking collapse was not related to any geopolitical actors, right?
There is no discussion about Syria or Iran, I think, of what I remember on October 18, 1920, or about Palestine, or about anything. Yeah. There's no discussion about anything but Lebanese, to a large degree, accountability. That, I think, dominates the failure long-term of March 14, meaning that nothing was done for the enrichment of Lebanon. Everything was done to damage this country more. And you're left with a population that's fed up. And then you have October 17. They're not from the same source.
The narrative of 14th of March, the typical 14th of March narrative and the 8th of March narrative, the way they see the economic collapse is the same, by the way. The 14th of March would say that it's because of Hezbollah and the sanctions on Hezbollah that the banking crisis happens. Whereas Hezbollah would say the same thing. It's because of sanctions on us that the banking collapse happens. But there was a movement saying, no, it's not the external actors. There are the banks, the banks fucked up. And that's the reason, and they gambled with our money. And that's the reason this collapse happened. Now, you were saying about the downside of bad actors reaping October 17. But would you find any? I mean, I'm sure there's plenty.
Maybe I shouldn't say bad actor because that makes it sound like they're as bad as what is really destroying this country right now. I meant bad actors as in they're coming from a bad place. They're coming from pain. And they're using that, I think, to gain leverage in ways that you can't do it 20 years ago. Yeah. And I think they're lying. Personally, I think they're lying. Yeah. And they're lying to people that voted for them too.
Okay. So October 17, other than the fact that it's that's focused on internal politics, we have a lot of problems, externally, but we have also internal problems. It's also the last
Can I make it more personal again?
Yeah, but just let me finish my sentence. Yeah. It's the last time Lebanese people had hope that things are going to change for the better. Yeah. October 17 was that. I don't think anyone now is optimistic about Lebanese politics.
I agree with you.
So that's what October 17 is. Yeah. Now, you wanted to ask me before that.
No, there's a revisionism that I don't think works when you measure it against reality. So these 3 or 4 October 17 MPs that treat Wael Taleb like he's problematic because he was a UN ambassador under Fuad Senora, to me, this is the most delusional commentary and analysis. Wael Taleb being problematic because he was an ambassador under Fuad Senora's government. The guy's the president of the ICJ. What better portfolio do you want for a prime minister? Forget whether or not he'd be a good prime minister. You could actually make the case that he'd be as shackled as anyone else.
You mean he would be better than Najib Mikati?
Let's say... Let's say you can make the case that he doesn't get much done anyway by default, right? But if you're going to be so pure in your assessment and exclude him because he existed in other governments, you're wrong, I think. Also, I don't really know. Give me one solid research paper on the massive scandals of Jihad Azhour. I have not read one.
I've read plenty.
You've read Al-Akhbar.
No. It's not just, no.
Okay, fine. I'd like to read it.
Wael Taleb and Jihad Azhour are 2 different things.
No, but the criticism about them comes from the same place. They both worked under Fuad Senora's March 14 government in different ways. The criticism is born out of that.
Wael Taleb was not a minister, right?
He was an ambassador. UN ambassador.
Completely different than being a finance minister, right?
Rejected by the same people. That's my point. Yeah. I'm saying you can find. No, let me say it again. There's a rejection towards an IMF regional director as well. The vetting process to get there, whatever you think about the IMF aside, the vetting process to get there is much higher than the vetting process to get here. If you're going to reject those kinds of people, you're also rejecting, I think, the sacrifices paid in March 14. That to me is bad politics. Whether it's from populism or misguided people that listen to the wrong people for a living.
Since you're mentioning the IMF, Also,
Yeah.
the point you made earlier that Lebanese politics is not just a Hezbollah problem. At some point, the solution for the economic crisis that we are facing today was an IMF deal, right? And those who opposed an IMF deal in Lebanon are not just Hezbollah at all. It's mostly people affiliated with the banks across all the parties, every single party.
Yeah.
Hezbollah at some point now, after Jihad Azzour, because he's the IMF regional head, after he was nominated, they started opposing an IMF deal. Before that, they did not object to the reforms that was proposed by the IMF to Lebanon.
Yeah.
It was other actors. I'm not defending Hezbollah. Hezbollah is the most strong party. It's part of the political class. But at some point, the solution was an IMF deal. And it's not Hezbollah who's preventing that. Still to this day, like you cannot, because of Hezbollah's weapons, delay any other problem. We have an economic crisis that we have to deal with. And within Hezbollah's presence, the IMF deal was one way out of this crisis. Yeah. It's not Hezbollah that prevents that.
There's a confluence of bad actors in this country that work well together.
Yeah.
As that group ascends to power, those actors gain more leverage and they end up mostly like Gibran Basir. Convenient allies, opportunists, and fiefdom-like leaders. I agree with you, yeah. But that's a consequence. To me, that's not the source. It's collateral damage. Better actors are not given a chance. Let me go back to try compare 3 years, because I like the 3-year window. 2019 to 2022. 2005 to 2008. I'm ignoring what's happening right now in the South. Forget that for a moment. You have August 4. You have Tayouni. That happens post-October 17. I don't blame October 17 people, supporters, for those kinds of collateral situations. It's not their fault that October 17 didn't take hold. I don't blame people that supported March 14 for not doing more too. I think movements in this country are not given a chance. The good and the bad are not given a chance, which to me is always more interesting. The bad actors too are not always given their fair chance to fail. So, no, let me say it better. Yeah. You have the July War, you have May 2008, and you have a dozen assassinations. And you have sit-ins, you have paralysis, you have the end of March 14. Here you have economic collapse. You have one of the strangest men to ever enter the Sarai, Hassan Diab, who comes and goes, and no one talks about him anymore. That's the face of failure. And he's in, where is he? I forget, is it the Sarai or Ba'abda? I don't remember, when the blast happens, and he's there picking up a flag from the floor. I don't remember where he is exactly. The guy has he's where? He's signing his book, yeah.
Probably, yeah.
He's at AUB suing them for not giving him $1 million. That kind of image, to me, is failure. And you know what? He has no control over the blast and its consequences, too. Even that failed politician cannot do more. So no one is able to do more. And October 17 cannot survive that kind of crisis, that kind of collapse. No one can emerge from that still in a good position.
So regarding, because you're talking about the downside of October 17.
No, why movements don't work on the street, why they don't translate into better politics, and why we have the same conversations we had 20 years ago.
I wouldn't agree that they did not translate to better politics. The change MPs, how many are they now? I lost count because we don't, Parliament is not very
12, 13, depending on...
But there's more as well. There's 16 MPs elected by people. Say what you want about the MPs.
16?
If you add to them the three Saida MPs and stuff. What's his name? Bizri and stuff. They become more than 13 people.
Okay.
Anyway, these 13 MPs, say what you want about them, but the people who elected them, they elected them for the right reasons. And that's a way for progress in Lebanese parliament. The bad part is that these 13 or 16 MPs did not unite over anything. That's the downside. But there is a positive side to that, which is that these people were elected. So people are changing, at least in terms of voting, people have changed prior and after the October 17, 2019.
I don't know what change happened. These MPs are the reason why no majority governance happens. They're not able to see common cause with the old left and right of the country.
I'm saying the people who voted for them, this is the good part.
What is good? That
they voted against the political class.
Okay, so let's go down this road. What exactly did these MPs do that improved anything?
That's another discussion. This is not what I'm saying.
So
right
okay,
now.
That's what I mean by...
I'm not here to defend the 13 MPs.
No.
They are, I would agree with you, they are not the best representatives.
No, I meant challenging the establishment is not something you put on your CV. I'm anti-establishment. That's my cause. Give me something better. I can't think of one thing. There's opportunities that are gone. They're severed from. You can't go back to them. Majority opposition is not feasible today. You put the ball in their court. They're refusing. You can't have. It's
position against what, Roni?
Oh, simple.
It's not only against, but that's what I'm saying. It's not only against Hezbollah.
Simple. Why is there no international investigation into a blast no one talks about anymore? There was no majority willingness to get one done. That's what happened in 2005.
From whom?
From the Lebanese state.
Yeah. But I mean, Parliament would approve such a thing. Or like the government which is elected by Parliament.
Your 16 friends, half of them, think that Tarek Bitar should go and resume his job even when he can't. They're delusional. Milham Khalaf got beat up yesterday because he still wants, I think yesterday, right?
Really?
2 days ago?
Yeah.
Yesterday, he got punched because he still thinks Tarek Bitar has a chance in doing his job.
Yeah.
I feel terrible for him that he gets punched. But what he's asking for is impossible. That to me is it's bad politics. It doesn't reflect reality. If you're just being anti-establishment, I don't think you're doing politics.
No, I'm with you. They should have a program. They should unite over a program.
It's not a program. It's simple. Majority governance for common cause. They can't get there. They simply can't get there.
Because they are only 16 MPs. What can they do? They are not a majority themselves.
No, because I think October 17, for reasons that are bad, because people are suffering, you end up with these kinds of people in any situation, not just Lebanon. Populists thrive when there's pain. Don't think Milham Khalaf knows. He doesn't define himself that way. I don't think he uses that word.
Populist, you mean?
I don't think any of them use that word. Even Sharban, your C word. I don't think they use. I don't think he considers himself a populist.
He's not a populist.
But. Well, I don't know what he is then. If he's not a populist, I don't know what he is. But these are spoilers. The people that vote for these characters, to me, are all good people. I don't find any flaw in voting for Lebanese parties or Lebanese opposition or change. The people deserve better. My point is, no one in this country can expect anything better when that huge machine that ended 2 movements, not 1, 2, is now...
Yeah, that's an important aspect.
Oh, but wait. I'll say one more thing, then I'll let you wrap it up before the Q&A.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say this, maybe it's an unpopular opinion. They're getting away with complete propaganda that they're now defending the Lebanese state again in the south. I don't think that's a minority view, that's a majority view. And I think a lot of people that are sometimes critical of that group are finding themselves conveniently defending that group for propaganda and for votes on populism, not for anything sincere. There's nothing there. This is pure propaganda. That's a narrative that's taking hold.
I would agree that Hezbollah and their allies were like the fierce defenders of the system, but in October 17 as well.
Yeah.
So not just 14th of March.
No, I'm talking about the South.
Yeah, but I'm saying, going back to October 17, Hezbollah and their allies were the fierce rivals to that movement back then, and they used soft power. They didn't have to use hard power to stop its momentum. Then COVID happened and stopped it completely. But yes, I would agree with you on this one.
I think the average person today, if they just check what's happening, they naturally, emotionally sympathize with anyone fighting Israel, even when it's the same group that is better at destroying Lebanon than fighting Israel. That's, I think, the story. And that is an ideology that you cannot shake when you're being bombed. And I think they've won a psychological battle.
I think things, not to agree or disagree with you on this point, but I think things go back to normal after things calm down. Like after the South calms down, I think things go back.
Really?
More or less, yeah.
So let me say one more thing, then I'll let you wrap it up.
Muhannad also agreed with me when on this point.
Muhannad Haj Ali,
yes.
The Carnegie researcher.
Yeah.
One of your best episodes, by the way.
Thanks.
Let me circle it back and then you can wrap it up. You know where we end up? 1990. We end up where there's a militia that's operating. There's an Israeli potential incursion on any day. There's no South Lebanese army, that's gone. But you have a UNIFIL that's not worth much. You have a militia determining peace and war. You have a population that's not playing politics anymore. You have a security situation that determines everything. And that's the story. That's how it all ends.
Before we go to the Q&A, I remember...
But wait.
Yeah.
That's how it ends. It ends that way. It ends with where we were in 2004. Unable to imagine that this situation will change. I think it's impossible to change it because of this scenario. You can't get movements to do more. You can't get people to do more. I think that's the sad story.
Before we go, take a break first and then go to the Q&A, I have a question for you, Ronnie.
Oh, shit.
We were talking about the 14th of March and where it fell short. Me and you would agree that people like Michel Aoun, Walid Jumblat, Nabih Berri, Samir Jaja should not be in politics today, right? Because they are not the ideal politicians to be representing the people. If we want if we want مشروع العبور in الدولة, the path for a functioning state, they are not the people to do that. We would agree on this point, right?
I think there's no one in this country in a position of power that can shine because of this situation, whether it's Walid Jumblat or Samir Jaja or Najat Aoun Saliba. They all end up in the same situation. I think these characters should be part of our history, and I think reform should have started 20 years ago. Okay. And I think parties should have evolved.
So we agree on this point. Anyway, should we, unless you have something to
No,
add?
let's take a 10-minute break. Yeah. We'll make the Q&A exciting. You can ask questions to both of us. I think happy hour is over, but the wine and cheese...
$25 for cheese.
It starts at 8 o'clock, so you can get wine and cheese if you'd like.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wael.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back.
That's Samir's threatening tone.
Please.
So, the microphones will be passed around. You can ask us whatever you want. And the first question goes to the lady sitting at the bar. She paid us for first question, right? Just introduce yourself if you can, what you do, who you do.
Here's Serena Kaddoum from the Advocacy Force for Development and Anti-Corruption in Lebanon, and I'm a jurist. I aim to ask the following question since I found you, especially Ali, very happy about the quote, Hezbollah isn't the Lebanon's problem. So I want if you allow me to come back to this sentence and ask the following. Do you think now, after everything we've witnessed, we can do the separation, a proper separation between building the state and enhancing its institutions and leaving it behind, or acting as there's an elephant in the room without like really taking serious action and solve this issue before everything else?
The short answer for that is no, I don't think we can. But Hezbollah's weapons, because I believe in the monopoly of the weapons in the hands of the state, like any other functioning government in the world, like any other functioning state. So I do agree with that. Now, what do you do? Hezbollah's weapons is a reality now. It's very popular, has its supporters. It's by far the most sophisticated party in Lebanon. They do the political game very well. And they have, as I said, they are popular. They will exist. We were talking with I was talking with Muhannad on the podcast. They will like Hezbollah will remain popular, not for a very long time, but in the horizon, they will remain very powerful. So how do you deal with Hezbollah's weapons? One of the problems I have with 14th of March is that they don't see anything from the way to achieving the state except for Hezbollah's weapons. They don't see any other measure to do except for that. At some point, you start to believe that they only use Hezbollah's weapons as a populist slogan without having the goal of building a proper state. Like for Hezbollah to hand over their weapons to the state, it's not the end goal. The end goal is the state, a functioning state. So what do you do with Hezbollah's weapons when it's a reality, when you cannot remove it? It's a big problem, I agree. And not just as a militia, as a political party, Hezbollah is very... What do you do with it? I mean, Hezbollah as a political party is okay if they just do politics. The problem is their military side, the fact that they exist militarily outside of the state. What do you do with Hezbollah? It's a hard question to answer. If I were a good actor in politics, I would do everything like around Hezbollah's weapons the right way. For example, part of why Hezbollah is popular is because they fill some gaps that the state does not fill. They provide support for the residents, for their population in their stronghold areas. So I would push for a state that does these kinds, like that provides electricity, that provides full healthcare, that provides plenty of things to fill the gaps that Hezbollah is filling. And that's one way. And with enough time, hopefully, there would be their supporters, including, they would trust the government enough for them not to support a party like Hezbollah, just like any other sectarian party. That's my answer. Do you want to answer the same question? Yeah.
Are you okay? Do you need water? No, I'm joking. You lost your breath there for a second.
Did I?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think local, regional, international moments have to line up for something to take hold once more. March 14, local appetite for an independent country. Forget sovereignty. Forget that. Some authority that's worth something was actually on the horizon. That has to be local appetite. It cannot be forced from above. The regional dynamics were working in Lebanon's favor. And the international, to a large degree, the international community, whatever you want to call it, saw Lebanon's case as worth something too. That's when there's a window to take actual action. I don't think that will happen ever again. So I don't think you can replicate this model again. I actually think what Wael is describing to me is asking for Somalia to function. Somalia is a failed state today. Lebanon is closer to Somalia today than it is to a governable state. I think that's where we are. A country that's too problematic and locals that manage. Somalia has cantons that are actually doing okay, like we have cantons that are doing okay too.
So without, let me push you on this one. Without regional power, like you said that there was a historical moment for regional powers to care about Lebanon, and it will not happen again. But like the problem we have is that we have politicians, be it Hezbollah or others, who don't want the best for the country, who are acting against the country's interests, right? So the solution for that is for the people to realize that they should elect better politicians. That's a solution, no? Without regional actors being involved.
If Lebanon was orbiting Earth like the moon, and there's nothing else interfering with that tiny rock in space, I think you should be able to deal with all of the problems without thinking about geopolitics. And that, I think, is deep down, I think that is what the average person wants, is to deal with everything else and improve it, and not deal with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, not deal with Arab-Israeli peace or war, and not deal with a sub-state militia that doesn't take Lebanon's concerns into account, takes Iran's concerns into account. I think most Lebanese don't want to be in that kind of scenario. But that's the geography we have.
But why is the sub-state militia powerful? Isn't it because it has it's a very popular militia? And if we remove that support for it, some of its power will be removed?
I don't think this is a popularity contest.
No.
I don't think it's because it's popular or unpopular. I think it's as well lubed and as important to that machine, whether it's popular or unpopular.
You don't think part of its power is its popularity?
I think part of its legitimacy is it is a Lebanese party. You have to have Lebanese people believing in it too. Yes, that's not why Hezbollah is there.
Okay.
I mean, we can go back in history. There's a more popular militia that's completely disarmed.
But it wasn't Lebanese. Well, you mean the Lebanese forces?
That scary, fierce militia ran geography and taxed people too by force. That's a militia that's popular in parts of the country. It's disarmed. So I don't think popularity is the reason why the Lebanese forces was disarmed. I don't think popularity is why Hezbollah is as big as it is right now.
I think it's a factor.
Yeah, it's a factor, sure, but factors are not as important to me as why this group has trucks in Syria, training in Iraq, why it runs the country in ways that were unthinkable before. That's not popularity. I'll say it differently. Hezbollah was at its most unpopular on October 6, 2023. And that group is paramount with or without October 7. It's re-legitimized again now, and its popularity is increasing too. That's true. But that's not why it comes and goes.
Don't know if I agree that it was at its peak of unpopularity on October 6th. I think it was still a very popular party.
Peak of its own. I can't think of a moment that it was more unpopular in history. When it was created, that old version. Yes, not the 1984 Hezbollah, the 2024 Hezbollah.
Anyway,
40 years later.
Another question.
Thank you very much. Refreshing new host. We enjoyed that a lot. Wow, do you want to do permanent host and we get rid of Ronnie?
It's up to you guys.
You're supposed to wait. You threw me under the bus like that. I'm going to Barzakh.
Yeah.
I mean, for those of us who arrived here post 2005, what was the kind of the source or the ethos or why was Syria here? Was it some sort of ideological aspect that Lebanon was part of a historic Greater Syria, or was it more for financial economic interests in terms of accessing the port? Why were they here in the first place?
Do you want to answer this?
You can.
No, please.
Oh, that was to me. Oh, then you can answer. Why was it here in 2005? The same reason it was here in 1976. The Syrian army entered in 1976 on the pretext of defending Kataib against the PLO. That pretext, which expired quickly, turned into their slow intrusion into Lebanese politics, economy, society, and for a large degree, we became the buffer to that regime's collapse. That's decades ago. And if you stretch it out, the Syrian army and the Syrian occupation meant battles on Syria's behalf played out here, not in Syria. That means
less interested in the pretext and actually the subtext.
Sorry?
Less interested in the pretext than actually the subtext.
What does that mean?
What is in the, you can have a pretext of why you need to go into a different sovereign state and occupy it. But that's a pretext, right? So what was the actual kind of rationale? Why was Syria wanting to occupy Lebanon without a pretext?
These regimes are not able to function without a battlefield like Lebanon. These regimes would have collapsed. The Syrian regime is now alive thanks to a Lebanese militia too. That's the story. We are defending the worst actors in the region, and Lebanon paid a huge price for that. To the point, in the 1990s, the Syrian regime was more concerned with the Israelis pulling out than anyone else. Their legitimacy, you mentioned legitimacy earlier, that's real legitimacy. What are they doing here if the Israelis are gone? That was their concern. So what is good for Lebanon is not good for the Syrian regime. The pretext and the subtext meets in 1989 when the Syrian army is fighting the Lebanese army and kicking out Michel Aoun from Ba'abda in a very bloody war that determines who's president, largely determines who's prime minister, or who's tolerable enough. And then you find these people that emerge under that orbit. Some of them become opponents over time. Some of them work with them day and night, but it's the umbrella. I think every decision Syria took in this country was not for the improvement of this country. It was to preserve one of the most ruthless, thuggish families in the region that are still there. That was March 14, 2005. It's waking up from that coma, a 15-year coma, but also a 30-year occupation and mismanagement, which is why people pointed the finger at Syria. This anti-Syrian sentiment was real. Anti-Syrian regime. Sorry, you wanted to...
No. So why would Syria occupy Lebanon? It's like any other country wanting to occupy other country. It's for power, for more territories and more power over another country. But the rationale that you were asking about, in 1990 or 1989, foreign powers, including the US, assigned Syria to take over Lebanon because Lebanon was fighting a civil war back then. And they assigned Syria to take over Lebanon to try to stabilize it. Of course, Syria helped the Americans in the Iraq war. So that was its payback. The Americans paid them back by giving them Lebanon. I mean, if we're analyzing now. Yeah, the Arab League as well. Anyway.
Every politician in this country that wanted to make a decision would go to Damascus. There was no Lebanese government worth anything. Decisions were taken there. Hafiz al-Assad spoke on Lebanon's behalf. Bashar spoke on Lebanon's behalf too. That, I think, is why it was such a united front, and that even Hezbollah supporters then, although they're thanking Bashar on March 8, the average opponent is anti-Syrian too.
I agree.
And some of them are odd characters. They're seriously anti-Syrian regime, but they defend Hezbollah too. You have that community that is real, and that I think it's shared across. Even the SSNP is banned in Syria. The most pro-Syrian party in the world is banned in Syria. The SSNP, only allowed to operate on Shara Mektasi. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Are there more questions in the back? Just introduce yourself if you can. Is that David?
Yeah, hey, sorry, I'm back. David Wood, International Crisis Group. Ironi and Wael, but especially Ironi, I want to just get a bit more insight from you about the change MPs. So let's say there's 13, according to Wael's count, 16 civil society MPs. Either way, it's about 10% of the parliament, right? So there's already like numerical limitations on what you can do. So My question's pretty simple. What would you have the Change MPs do? I mean, I've spoken to a few of them, and probably the most realistic option for change from within the system is more accountability, like trying to hold majority or, establishment politicians, shall we say, to account. But do you agree that that is a good approach? If we accept that change from outside the system is practically impossible, how would you go about change from within the system? Because you mentioned good politics and bad politics by the Change MPs. You've told me what bad politics is, but what's good politics?
I think it depends what you're trying to get done in this security nightmare. I think it depends what exactly you're trying to do. The only template I saw work in my lifetime was majority governance that largely opposed a bad status quo, which means you have to work in a majority. I don't think you can stand alone. So that, I think, is a mistake. They're not 13 alone, there may be 6 or 5 that ended up being alone over time. But the unwillingness to form majority consensus, I think, was a mistake. My best example is the port blast. It's stupid to insist on a local investigation when you know you can't do it. Refusing to join hands and request an international one is beyond consideration for me. It just doesn't make sense. That's so Puritan, it's out of step with everything that's happened. So majority consensus is something that works in this country. In terms of day-to-day governance, I mean, what's left of it? What is left today that's actually something you can work with? I can't think of one thing today.
Reforms. Capital control, lifting banking secrecy.
Yeah.
A lot of the reforms demanded by the IMF. Basically.
No, but I mean actual legislation that's taking place today.
No, but that's actual legislation. That's very important.
What is happening right now?
Everything is stalled. We talked.
Right. So he said it's stalled. Paralysis, I think, they cannot pretend like paralysis is not real, which some of them do. And they're better, by the way, they're better at Twitter than being MPs. They still post the way they did in 2021, which to me is stupid. I have nothing generous to tell about somebody in Parliament today that rode a wave of protest and is lying. I had no sympathy there.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't know if they are lying or not. I think 13 or 16 MPs from 128 MPs is a very little amount for them to actually make change. But what they can do, Dave, is they can unite over a program. That's something they haven't done.
They couldn't agree on a consensus president for an opposition. We don't have a president. It's not their fault that we don't have a president. You can't blame them for there being no president. You can blame them for not having a symbolic majority, which they refused to do. They said flat out no.
But because they would have to be aligned with not the 14th of March,
they would have to be as noble as George Harry.
I don't understand what you mean.
There are MPs that pretend to be revolutionary in Parliament that think Sleiman Frangi and Jihad Azor are the same person.
No, but the candidate for this camp was Michel Maouad, for example. I would understand if they don't want to support Michel Maouad, for example. I would, yeah.
Jihad Azor is not Michel Maouad.
So we can talk about Jihad Azor.
No, but that's what I meant.
But I'm sure they can unite over a name. At least the 13 to 16 MPs.
Can they?
No, they can. They should, I mean.
Oh, they should?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can have what ended up happening, which is 6 of them voted for a false candidate. Ziad Beirut.
Yeah.
That's not good politics. That's bad politics. Maybe less than 6. Maybe less than 6.
It's hard to know because it's secretive. So
you included the extra 3 that I never heard of for the change block.
Yeah.
So it could be 6.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. But David, those are biggest things that impact the country. Day-to-day affairs, I don't know what is happening right now that these MPs can contribute to. Melhem Khalaf is getting beaten up because Tariq Bitar is not going to his job, but he hasn't been there for over a year. Okay, what are the other MPs doing? I can't think of any legislation that they're contributing
to. They don't have much power within their number among parliament.
Because it's paralyzed.
Not just Not just because it's paralyzed. I'm saying them as 13 or 16 MPs, they don't have much power. So we can't blame them too much. We can blame them for not uniting, but we cannot blame them too much. And I think most of them are for the reforms that are necessary to get Lebanon out of its economic crisis. So,
yeah, they are on Twitter. They are. Every day they still post.
Yeah, no. Anyway, next question, maybe.
Next question.
Hello.
Just who you are, what you do.
Okay.
Not from there. Here.
Well, Haj, I'm a consultant. That figures it. Going back to March 14th.
The shadiest occupation in Lebanon. Right?
The shadiest occupation, exactly. Well, going back to March 14 and October 17, one distinction, having been there, you could see on the ground was, and I'm interested to hear your perspectives both on it. March 14, even when you were there the night before that or that day, you would see people excited. You would see people there. Everyone was on the same page, but there were no discussions like the ones held before October 17, which is tense, people having economic discussions. All of the discussions were simply based on Syria and Syria out. And at the end of the day, once you got beyond that point, it was all about which political party you belonged to. And it was very clear back then. You knew coming from different areas. I mean, I remember coming back down to downtown, it was clear FPM and Lebanese forces were coming through from Ashrafiyya side. You had the future movement coming from the other side. So it was very clear which political party was coming from where.
And they were flying their flags.
And the flags as well.
Yeah.
And the flags as well. Even though back then there was the red and white, scarf that Samir Asir used. October 17, what was different, and maybe that started to build in what we call the garbage protests of 2015, was there started to be talks. People were appearing outside of the normal political structure. I'm curious to hear about what your take is on the fact that once the Syrians were out and the gap was there, the political establishment came and filled it out, and that's when things started to go off the rails. Same thing with October 17. When it was just pure as it is, it worked. And then once some political establishments came in and rode the wave, to say it that way, that's when also things started to go sideways. So it kind of feels same players, same politicians, same everything back then and now were the ones who kind of eventually led to failure of those two events, let's say. And to your point, Roni, when you mentioned Samir Asir, there were other people who were not necessarily the key political figures. Let's forget Michel Aoun. Let's forget Lebanese forces, Hariri at the time. You can mention, on both sides of the aisle, Ziad Majid, or other people at the Bristol, Pierre Jmeil, the son, who was later assassinated. These were people who were not necessarily the political elite, who had vision, who maybe could have done something, but they were never given the chance. Even before, all of that happened, they were all
Ziad Majid's friend was killed and he fled. True. Pierre Jmeil was killed.
No, but what I mean is, what ended up happening is these people who could have induced change either were assassinated or were put aside, not necessarily by the opponents, but by their own higher up political leaders or the big leaders who kind of cast them to the side and did the deals. And I think this is what you were alluding to at some point. So I'm interested to hear your take on those.
You wanted them to do more? That you're asking these individuals, I think Ziad Majid shouldn't be blamed for fleeing. Yeah.
Big figures ended up casting the big, all the others, all of those ended up casting the key people who could have done change on the side, did the deals as well, said, and, we can blame, say, Hezbollah, but they all, once Syrians left and the cake became bigger, everyone came in to say, okay, my political party wants a piece of that cake. And that's what ended up happening. And that's why March 14 failed. The key parties put aside everyone who with a vision and decided to start, open the market and start buying and selling.
I didn't really understand the question. Why didn't they prefer the civil society crowd as opposed to the leadership? I mean, that's a good question for October 17. For March 14, I don't know if you would.
Some of them were killed. Yeah, most of them were assassinated.
All of them. And the point I think earlier is that leadership then was something that was considered good. Communal legitimacy too was essential. You're not asking Gilbert Doumet and I don't know, some other civil society person to represent the Lebanese forces and FPM. These are legitimate communal leaders that are not toxic names, at least then. I think the emphasis on them was correct. I don't think it would be odd if Samir Jaja comes out of jail after 11 years and gives the baton to you and says, Wael, you can do better. You're the right face. It's odd. I think it's at a time when these leaders are not considered illegitimate. They're actually considered representative. Your point about Ziad Majid, I share the purpose of somebody like him being part of Lebanese politics, but I can't blame him for taking a step away and saying it's not for me. Right, but just like him, it should be Samir Asir, not Ziad Majid. Yeah, to me that's so essential. The gifted natural leaders are one by one targeted. October 17, there's no aspiration for leadership. There's no demand for leadership.
That's what I was going to say. One of the mistakes in October 17 was that it was leaderless. Yeah, and it's understandable back then. Now in hindsight, you criticize the movement for this. But back then, me personally, I was against it having leaders. Why? Because in 2015, the movement had leaders and they demonized them or intimidated them or whatever. That's why people didn't want any leaders in that movement. I think now we can say it. I think the best case scenario back then in October 17 was to have leaders who would negotiate with the political class to get compromises from them. Now we know this would have been the best case scenario. Yeah.
That's politics, actually. That's compromise. Yeah. Yeah. Did you have a question at the front? Sarah Burji. What do you do, Sarah?
I wanted to go incognito. No, you said my name. I'm a friend of the Beirut Banyan.
I feel bad for you.
Yeah, you should. It's not a question, but rather comments on what you said earlier. Regarding March 14 compromising, I believe March 14 started to compromise early on, even before the security threats, when they decided not to throw Emil Lahoud away.
For sectarian reasons.
Yes, and this is very unfortunate. And this is when it started to face reality, the dark reality of Lebanon. So this was a misstep because it had the opportunity to be a real revolution, and unfortunately it was halted because of that. Second,
it's the patriarch who said no.
Yeah, this is one of
he said the same about Riyad Salemi, by the way, like a different patriarch.
Yeah, but for patriarch's fair, it might be his only mistake, in my opinion. The only black point on his CV. History. Yeah.
On his CV, is his LinkedIn still up? I don't think so.
Where is it?
No, I'm joking. Yeah.
Second, you were saying that the corruption of March 14 doesn't have anything to do with Hezbollah. But on this point, I believe, corruption is actually a symptom of mismanagement or the absence of a real state and not a problem. It's more of a symptom than a problem. And this is why I guess March 14 slipped into being, again, because they were already probably corrupt leaders. It slipped again into corruption because the state was not, there is no well-established state, so they slipped again into their old patterns of being the corrupt leaders they were. And funny enough, people who were against March 14 and more specifically the FPM, who rallied people around them in order to fight corruption, and this was their main motto, themselves, they became later the faces of corruption in Lebanon. Third, and here it's a question to Ronnie. Ronnie, you were saying about October 17th that it's not enough to be against the establishment in order to be a viable political solution. Don't you think, and I'm asking here because I am a proud March 14 supporter, and people who were not with March 14 back then, they would tell me, okay, fine, Syria's out, and this is what Wael said earlier. So what is the use, why we should be with people like Jumblat or Hariri or you name it? So don't you think March 14th faced the same problem that October 17th leadership or representatives have? And how would have it been able to evolve into becoming a real political program or platform for the future? Thank you.
So going back to March 14, not October 17. I agree with Wael's sentiment earlier. None of these people should be in our discourse. I don't see a role for Samir Jaja today, or Walid Jumblat, or any of the people that have come and gone. Saad Hariri too. These are, to me, all past their prime. Some of them well past their prime. Some of them violent, some of them non-violent. I don't equate them as the same. I don't think Saad Hariri and Nabih Berri are the same creature, but they're both past their prime. It's a shame Nabih Berri is still here and Saad Hariri is in Abu Dhabi, but they're both past their prime. How do you get to a better state? This is where I think Wael and I sometimes agree, sometimes don't. And you can, if you want to interject. I think still at its core, in 2024, this country is not secular, it's sectarian, it's community-based, and it organizes itself that way even when there's no state. At the moment, whether there's a little bit of legislation or not, there's the absence of a state in this country. Communities are behaving in ways that are familiar to the 1980s, which is canton-like geography fiefdoms, some more successful than others. That's the worst case scenario. That's borderline anarchy, and I think we've entered that phase already. That is the end of the story. How do you actually avoid that entire 2-decade duration? I think these parties are real. I think these communities are real. I think their histories are real. And I think all of that has to be taken into account. You need these groups to reform.
They can die as well.
And when they fail, they should die.
Yeah. No. Yeah. They will die soon, like at some point, because they are old. So that's one way for the reform.
No. Sorry, I meant the.
It's the truth. What can I say?
Yeah. No, you're right. No, Nabih Berri may die. May never die. But you're right. You're right. How old is he now? 88.
He's more. He's like
80. Never. He's in his late 80s, right? Or whatever. Okay, so my point was these communities are going to express themselves the way they do as Lebanon expresses itself. So the parties have to reform. Their leadership has to evolve too. They have to be younger and more responsible.
Or the parties will become less powerful because they are the glues of their parties. Michel Aoun, when he dies, they will fight with each other, be it Ibrahim Kinaan or Ala Aoun or whatever. The party will not stay as united as it is today. Harakat Amal, the same thing. When Berri dies, there's no inheritor of Berri. Like, he's the glue of the party. So,
but these groups that behave the way they do, where there's no state, is the default, which is, I think, bad. It's that geography, community, and party become all the same. And they're not able to reform. Even when there's opportunities for small cosmetic reform, they don't take it. That's corruption. That's when they choose bad decisions for the sake of the community and the party. That, I think, has to be avoided, but it wasn't. So the point I'm trying to say is that Lebanese forces, that name should have changed. Jaja should be gone. He should be retiring somewhere. Just Jumblat should not be in our language. Berri should have also either exited the planet or exited politics. And we shouldn't know who Saad Hariri is. We shouldn't even know that name to begin with. That, I think, is this slow generational shift and reform that March 14 was meant to begin. It never took hold. Otherwise, I firmly believe Lebanon will be a sectarian state until we all perish from this planet. And worse, I think, this is my sense, extremism becomes normalized. And certain communities are more eager to govern themselves than others. And I think you could see the eventual partitioning of Lebanon, not necessarily the country's borders changing, but where cantons really become solidified, where the worst instincts, I think, become tolerated. The more extreme, I think, does eventually take hold.
Wait.
I think for the odd characters, like you call them, people who could have been aligned with March 14 or March 18 or FPM, the defining decision on which camp to be with is what instincts you decide to follow back in 2005. So people who followed their worst instincts, who followed their sectarian impulses, I think they ended up choosing when they decided to choose their sectarian, like what they saw as the benefit of their sect over the project of a state, over how much of optimism they had around the formation of a real state. Those people, they ended not supporting March 14 and asking the question that I asked you earlier: why would I be with March 14? Why would I be with Hariri and Jumblat and Jaja? And those people, funny enough, are now more or less the same people who are pushing for federalism. Because I think choosing to be with March 14 is being optimistic enough about the existence of this country in the shape that we imagined or we wished for. And people who took on a more realistic approach to things decided not to side with March 14.
I think Charlie had a question.
Yeah. No, I think these words are neutral. Federalism shouldn't evoke emotion. But and neither should sectarianism. These are neutral words. They're descriptive. But I think there's a readiness to acknowledge that there's nothing you can do about this bigger problem and opt out. I think it's happening slowly. But that takes time. It's not that these things don't happen overnight. But you see how communities behave and how they interact with void. It signals, I think, the eventual partition. Which to me means extremism wins when there's no healthy governable state. That's the default.
Charlie.
Who you are, Charlie, and what you do.
Hi, guys. Thanks for such a stimulating discussion. My name's Charlie Laurie. I'm a PhD student at the University of Sussex, and I look at Lebanon's imported fuel sector, which is a lot more interesting than it sounds. My question is a comment, maybe, if you'll indulge me, rather than a question. And it's trying to push back against this comment I just heard about characterizing Lebanon's political economy as a sectarian one. I think, to misquote an old German philosopher, there's a spectre haunting Lebanon, and that spectre is capitalism. I think talking about sectarianism risks precluding a more substantial and I dare say accurate analysis of the situation, which is that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of holding companies domiciled in jurisdictions like Luxembourg or Monaco or Switzerland, which are multi-sectarian. You know, Lebanon in that sense is a wonderfully multi-sectarian, or rather harmonious country. It's only on paper in tax havens. So the owners of these companies, which are robbing and ruling over Lebanon and its institutions, its state-owned enterprises, for example, the people who own those companies and who derive a living from their wealth come from a wide range of different sectarian backgrounds and are happy to cooperate in robbing the country in doing so. So to suggest that the country is balkanized and split up into these geographical, convenient fiefdoms is a superficially convincing analysis, but to my mind doesn't actually stack up when you look at where the money goes.
Can I answer before? I think when you reach a certain income bracket in this country, everyone is not sectarian. The average Lebanese, I think, still defines themselves within communities. Luxembourg, I don't think, reflects Lebanon's reality. And also the inclusiveness of Lebanon is multi-sectarian. That's the recipe. That's the template. That's the thing that pulled in not just Lebanese communities, but the region's best too. So Lebanon is meant to be the shining star. It's meant to be the metropole, not Dubai. That, I think, is the story. That's the legacy that March 14 like-minded people were trying to recreate in their minds at least. But I do think, unfortunately, perhaps, it is not superficial, it's real. Lebanese sectarianism is real. The richest of Lebanon go to the same restaurants, sure. Lebanese interact with each other on a daily basis, absolutely. But community and identity here is permanent. It's not something that just disappears. Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Point taken, but I think that again risks ignoring the history of labor movements in this country. No, I mean, if we look at the Lebanese fuel refining industry, which was, for those of you interested, a key contributor to Lebanon's wealth in the pre-Civil War period, you realize that there were, thoroughly solidaristic networks of workers, and that those obviously fell apart and were, you might say, sectarianized in the post-Civil War period, and now we are where we are. But I think that the fact remains that there were radical and cooperative groups that transcended sectarian lines. So history teaches us that these sorts of path dependencies, which seem so inevitable to us now, were in fact not so very inevitable at some point in the not too distant past.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can be secular-minded in a sectarian society too. I don't think these are contradictory terms, but I think communal power sharing and consensus, for good or bad, I think will still define how politics plays out in Lebanon. Not money, not finance abroad, not corporate activity. No, I think that's open to the world. It's not just Lebanese that deal with each other. But Wael, did you want to add to that?
No, yeah, I agree.
All right. Yes, the lady in the back. Just identify yourself, please.
Yeah. Julia, so I cannot be incognito because I have to identify. I'm a journalist by profession and by heart. My question would be, Wael said that his parents have been communists back then. So my question would be also talking about populism and popularity. Where have the communists been back at March 14? And why didn't they profit in a way by all of those debates, anti-occupation, anti-imperialism, the fight for Palestine, and anti-capitalism? And where have they been over those years? And especially then October 17, when actually the movement was also largely against the banking system. So those are all very inherent leftist cases.
The 14th of March is different than October 17 in this sense, because on October 17, they played a big role. There's a village in South Lebanon called Kfar, the communist village. Can't remember the name of the village. Kfar Debian, not Kfar Debian.
Yeah, Kfar Debian, yes.
Yeah, anyway. Back then, because in the villages where Hezbollah and Amal are very popular, people were intimidated from protesting. But this village we're talking about, for example, because back then, supporters of Amal and Hezbollah would try to intimidate protesters on the street, like the ring. It used to happen often, and they would shout Shia, Shia, Shia. In that particular village, which is a Shia village, the communists in the village, despite the Communist Party's stance back then, they were protesting. There's a Thawra Fest, by the way, until this day in this village. So they were protesting within like the protests that were happening across the country. And the Hezbollah and Amal supporters were shouting, Shia, Shia. And they replied saying, Shia, Shia, because we're also Shia. So the Communist Party's role was not the party itself, but maybe the supporters of it were close to that on October 17. And in 2005, during the 14th of March movement, Ronnie would know more about this, but there was a branch that was anti-Syrian regime. The leadership was pro-Syrian regime, Khalid Hdaydi back then, but there was a branch that was anti-Syrian regime. George Howie, who was assassinated during this year, was not the biggest figure, because there was Ilyas Atallah as well. But yeah, the Communist Party was, in its formal form, was opposed to that movement, you can say. Why haven't the Communist Party played a big role? What you were asking, Ziad Rahbani, the communist himself, said something once. He said, the failure of the Communist Party is the failure of its leadership, in which you can expect their statements 10 years ahead. You can expect what they are going to say. So the leadership is so corrupt. I can't find another explanation to this. Hassan Nasrallah, like him or hate him, he interacts with the people on every occasion. He will be speaking now. His strength is in every occasion. He does not read his speech. He communicates well with his supporters. That leadership was absent within the Communist Party.
We have time for a few more questions if anyone still has. Oh, Sam, sure.
You have a question.
Did you want to say something?
I want to say that if you can, is there a question for me or for Ronnie? Because I have to run to the toilet and then come back, so you can ask him meanwhile.
That's why I have Wael as a co-host.
But I'll pass on my question to someone else.
Sure. Are there other questions before we wrap it up? No? Should we just all leave Wael in the bathroom and play with some? That would be fun, huh? Did you have a question, Sam?
Well, I just wanted to comment and ask a futuristic question. My comment is more about October 17 for me is not a failure, for example. And this whole idea of no leadership that came from before, from the Occupy movement, from the Arab Spring movement and all of that. There's a reason for that, I think, especially in Lebanon's case. We are rising up against all the corruption that exists, but I feel we as a people also understood that corruption is also part of us. So, in my opinion, at least having a leader come up from this movement would have just played into the corruption itself. But the idea of October 17, I think, is a very strong idea that still permeates even now and will in the future. But the question I want to ask is, what advice would you give for the next wave of this revolution?
I don't know if maybe we can have a back and forth here. I don't see a next wave happening, personally.
Oh, I disagree.
Then I hope you're right. So I'll answer the question, but I don't think the template is something you can repeat. I think too many movements have come and gone. Somebody during the break commented, and they're right. It's not significant as much, but the You Stink protests did leave their mark too. And they do contribute to October 17. But I think once you've done that for at least 2 generations, you've left, I think, a bad template for the next one. I don't think they're going to replicate. That's my hunch. But let's say a time comes in our lifetime. I can't predict the 22nd century. Let's say end of the 21st century. We're still doing this at Aaliya's. Yeah. And he's still alive. He's 190. Yeah. If there's a wave again that wants change,
I think that's the key thing. Another wave that won't change, not necessarily in the same format.
I don't think all change is for the better. I think if that happens, it might be changed for the worse. And I could see that happening through civil disobedience and the delegitimization and boycotting of institutions. I think that could happen. But I don't think it takes the right form in that it's not going in the right direction. I think it fractures and collapses into cantons. That's how I see any movement reemerging. I simply don't see the recipe ever happening again, where things are so bad at once, Lebanese across geography and across parties, for a few days at least, see common cause. Maybe a week later it begins to fade. But that doesn't matter. There's a moment where the biggest demonstration of Lebanese history takes place. That's October 17. And it's inclusive. It's not exclusive. March 14 is perhaps smaller in size. Maybe it's smaller in scale, and that they could point at goals too. But to have everything line up for the Syrian withdrawal of Lebanon, to have everything line up for Iran to reconsider its leverage in Lebanon, I don't see that happening. So I don't see either one happening. I see a failed state ahead. I don't see the nightmare ending soon. I don't see a regional deal that protects Lebanon. I don't see Lebanese believing that they can actually govern this country in a sensible way. I don't see it. But wait, let me ask you, you're younger than me. You're 12 years younger than me. Could you answer his question?
I wasn't here when the question was asked.
The next wave, what would you recommend to the next wave, if there is one?
Next wave of the revolution.
What would I recommend? Again, I think I answered this question earlier. If we pick up a momentum like October 17, they should, at their peak, know how to get the consensus they need during this period. That's all I can. I cannot predict the future. So, yeah. The lesson we learned from October 17 is that, and you can't blame the people too much, because like they were attacked when they were protesting, for example, and then COVID killed the momentum completely. But that would be my advice within the current political class. I'm saying, as powerful as they are now. Anyway, I think
we have time maybe for one more question before we wrap it up. Anyone? No? All right. Yeah. Well, I'll try to wrap it up, and you can have the final say.
No, yeah.
Should I have the final say?
Yeah.
All right, fine. It's always fun doing this with you, by the way, at home and here. So, yeah, and watching you go to the bathroom and come back.
That's the fun part.
Yeah.
No, you wrap it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go back in time and then speed it up to today. Last week, some point, maybe over the weekend, maybe it was Friday, or I don't remember, Michel Smeha was interviewed. Did everyone see this interview on, I don't know what platform it was. I forgot which platform.
Rashad, what's his name? Yeah.
His name escapes me now.
Yeah. Daher. Rawad Daher, yeah.
Okay, so he's being interviewed. Michel Smeha, his first words, thank you Bashar al-Assad, thank you Hassan Nasrallah. Okay, this is a man who spent roughly 10 years either in jail or house arrest, found guilty for transporting bombs into Lebanon from Syria, caught red-handed, pays a price. He's sent to jail. He's on TV or YouTube or whatever, 2024, thanking the crowd that believes in him and sees him as a useful political figure. That, to me, is the rightful ending of March 14. He's caught by a brigadier general named Wissam al-Hassan. 2 months later, Wissam al-Hassan is killed in Ashrafiyya, car bombing. I don't know how this country can target bombs transported across the country when one of the most talented officers is killed in broad daylight. But forget Wissam al-Hassan. Somebody younger than, I think younger than you, Wael, Wissam Eid, is the reason why there was a verdict into the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. It's a Lebanese intelligence officer who has actual data to provide. He's killed for providing that data. Why would you expect more from intelligence services when their smartest are killed for doing their job? That's just two names. It's so cliche at this point, but because it's been played over and over and over and over and over.
Francois Al-Hajj as well.
And Francois Al-Hajj, you're right. There's a long list of names. It's been repeated on TV, on social media. It's past its prime too. But Gibran Twaini's speech on March 14, 2005, it meant something. The guy's a gifted journalist and a gifted orator in front of 1 million Lebanese in Martyrs Square calling for unity. He's killed 6 months later, 8 months later. He's actually burying Samir Asir in June, and then he's killed himself in December. You have a natural gifted orator, somebody who's not really a politician either, who can navigate the left and the right and can be friends with both sides too. He's killed. Why would you expect journalists to do better than that? I can't think of anyone more gifted than that. What I see instead, and I'll include the last person, is Bassel Fleihan. He's younger than me when he's killed. He's a World Bank guy. He comes and becomes an economics advisor. He's a minister of economy, but he's actually a very humble, quiet Protestant who's advising Rafiq Hariri in ways that are sensible, and he's with him in the car. I can't imagine someone better than that advising someone like Rafiq Hariri. You want him in the room. If you can't have him in the room, what can you expect better? I think instead what happens is that the good guys are too afraid. The good people are too afraid. The ones that want a better life leave. And the ones that are willing to pander and work with the problem enter the halls of power. And you end up with a failed state. That, I think, is where we are, unfortunately. But I think it's important to always reflect on that occasion, even when it's unpopular to do so, because there's a moment Lebanese tried, and they tried really hard. And 20 years later, Michel Smeha is thanking the Syrian regime and Hezbollah. That's the story. On that note, Wael, thank you for tonight.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Thanks to Samir and Rayan for staying past their time, past their bedtime. I don't know if William and Neve are still here, but thanks to them for always doing this. Wine and cheese, $25. We're supposed to say that. Yeah. And it's an honor to have such a big audience listening to us talk. This will be on the podcast a few days later. Thanks to everyone who came out tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.